Hey everybody, my name is Patrick O'Halloran and I'm with WhereScape. It's 12:15. I've only got 20 minutes. I'm going to get started promptly. I know lunch is at 12:35 and I don't want to get between any of you and lunch. So I've actually got an alarm set to go off at 12:33 so I can be sure and wrap up on time. Let me see if this works. Hey, I've got slides. So I'm going to talk a little bit about WhereScape, who we are, what we do. It just kind of sets the context for some case studies I'm going to go through. I'm going to talk about a small company, a medium company, a large company, how they were building. I use the term data warehouse, and I've talked to a few of you at our table. Data warehouse is not quite an obsolete term, but it's kind of a limiting term. Whether it's a data lake house, data mart, data vault, whatever it is, you've got something I call a data foundation. You've got multiple source systems feeding into a large database. You're doing curation on it, you're aggregating data, you're creating a presentation layer, and then at the end you've got data analysts, data scientists, AI machines, whatever it is that's consuming that data. So that whole structure of getting data into a database, getting it curated and getting it presentable, I'll call that a data foundation. And it takes many forms. It could be in the cloud, it can be on-prem. Lately we've been seeing a lot of customers that are using WhereScape. WhereScape helps design and automate that whole process of developing and deploying that data foundation. A phrase I've said a couple times, and everyone is nodding when I've said it because you've heard it 6 times already yesterday and today, is garbage in, garbage out. That's one of the most critical things for AI is the quality of the data you're going to get. If you're training an AI machine, if you are feeding data into an AI machine to get results out, you're doing predictive analysis, you're doing generative AI, whatever it is, the quality of the data you put in determines the quality of the results you get. Now, building this data foundation is a very cumbersome, risky process. Gartner, in I think 2022, had a report that said building a data warehouse is the riskiest project an IT team can take on. It's, I think 50% of them either weren't finished or were finished but didn't deliver the results and weren't used because the data analysts either didn't understand what was in the data warehouse or didn't like what was in the data warehouse, didn't trust it. So lack of trust in the delivery ecosystem, that's probably a number one concern of successfully building this data foundation. New compliance, more data, difficult to find staff. If you've ever worked in IT, these are common problems. That's something I'm seeing in the last 12 months, 18 months. The number of source systems that people are pulling data from is exploding. Through acquisitions, through new tools, through new data availability, and obviously getting that data from new source systems into your data foundation is a struggle as well. Communicating, documentation, and manual coding is a problem, and we'll talk about automation and how that alleviates some of these risks. So in my limited time, I'm going to just talk briefly about WhereScape. WhereScape started as a consulting company about 22 years ago in New Zealand. We were building data warehouses by hand and started seeing a lot of repetitive tasks, so we started creating tools and scripts for automating the design and development of data warehouses. Those tools became pretty powerful and pretty flexible, and at some point, some of our customers started asking if they could buy those tools, and WhereScape stopped as a consulting company and began as a software company, and that's what we are today. Based primarily in Texas, we've got offices in Europe and Asia. We've got customers in South America, North America, Africa, the Middle East, Europe. What we say we do and what we actually do is by automating that process, instead of hand coding, you have a lot more consistency in what you're creating. And that consistency allows you to do things like adopt rules for data governance, for PII, for data quality checks, and things like that. And I'll talk about that as I go through some of the use cases. As I said, 1,200 customers. We talk about increased developer output, but it's not just doing things faster, it's doing things better. Automating the development of a data warehouse is like comparing a car to a horse. A car is more than just a fast horse. Data warehouse automation, data automation with our tools is more than just producing things faster. You're producing things much better as well. As I said, design, develop, deploy, operate. We're an end-to-end solution. Whether you choose to build things from a bottom-up approach by building individual objects and then connecting them, or whether you want to take a top-down approach, create your conceptual model of what your data foundation is going to look like all the way through implementation. I was hoping I could do a demo today, but I'm not going to have time. If you're curious and want to see it, we'll be at our table through the afternoon. I can literally, using WhereScape, starting with a source system, let's say it's a Microsoft, that's what I've got on my laptop. I've got SQL Server running. I can create a dimensional model with a fact and a couple dimensions up in Snowflake, literally in 10 or 15 minutes. The advantage of that is I can show that to an analyst. I've seen this time and time again. Companies take on data warehouses as an IT project, and the analysts in business is kind of an afterthought. That's unfortunately the way things are often done. But when IT goes to the analyst and say, what do you guys want? What are your requirements? The response is usually, well, what have you got? So the idea that I can use automation, I can do fast prototypes, I can add transformations, I can denormalize data, I can do whatever it is I want to do for the analyst right in front of them. They can then use Tableau, Power BI, whatever it is they're used to using, and give you immediate feedback. I can then adopt, adapt, and improve quickly. And that's one of the foundations of an agile development is rapid prototyping. Prototyping and getting something in front of a user is more important than hard requirements. Again, we've got a design tool. I'll skip over that briefly. Again, we've got limited time. We've got a builder tool. I can literally generate, the nice thing about the builder tool is I can tell it I want to take that data out of a SQL Server database and I want to put it up in Snowflake. I don't need to know how to do that. I don't need to know how to query the SQL Server database. I don't need to know how to do the typecasting and conversions from SQL Server types to Snowflake types. I don't need to know how to get that file up in Snowflake storage. I don't need to know how to get that data from Snowflake storage into a table. All that's handled automatically. That's where a lot of the time and savings comes in, as well as testing. Things tend to work the first time. That's what our builder tool does, creates, to use technical terms, DDL and DML, Python scripts, things like that, things that will unload data from a variety of sources and get it into a variety of targets without me having to know the detail. I've probably generated, 50,000, 100,000 lines of Python code using WhereScape. I don't know Python. Skip over some development process. What I want to get into is the case studies. This is what I wanted to talk about. I've got examples of WhereScape customers, a small company, a medium company, a large company. And I want to talk about the struggles they went through in either migrating to the cloud or completing a project or completing an excellent project. And I'm starting with a company called Tenkate. The URL for the case study itself is on our website. I can give that to you later if you want to come by the booth we're at, or you can just go to wherescape.com and look at case studies. So Tenkate is a small company, probably 200 to 300 employees. They build specialty fabrics. Fabrics that are used by fire departments, by the military, by first responders. And they had an operation in the US and an operation in Europe. I think they were both using SAP. And the corporate headquarters said, we're going to consolidate all that and have one single analytics system rather than two separate analytics systems. So the two guys, they had to migrate essentially from their on-prem solution to a cloud solution and integrate data from SAP in the US and SAP in Europe. And the two guys I worked with had come from a previous company where they were building a specific methodology called Data Vault. And they had a team of 20 at this previous company. They had a team of 20 people that worked for a year. And after a year, they gave up. They just garbage canned the whole thing and threw it away. So those two guys left. They came to Tenkate, and they said, okay, we're going to do a similar project here. We need to use different tools, better tools. So we convinced them to use WhereScape. Those two guys wound up building their entire data warehouse in 9 months. So two guys doing in 9 months what 20 people couldn't do in a year. There's a really good book out there called The Mythical Man Month. It was written in the 80s. I got it as a gift on my first programming job. You're nodding up and down. Have you heard of it? Yeah. By a guy named Frederick Brooks. My first programming job, my boss gave it to me and I read it. It's written by a guy who's writing about developing operating systems. Multi-thousand million line. This is back in the 80s when everything memory was expensive and things. And he's got a couple axioms that he refers to in the book, and one of which is adding people to a late software project makes it later. The idea is that the bigger a team gets, the more lines of communication you have. You have 2 people, you got 1 line of communication. You got 6 people, you've got 15 lines of communication. You got 10 people, you've got 45 lines of communication. So sometimes a smaller team is more efficient and faster, and a tool like WhereScape that can help increase productivity, and it's an all-encompassing tool that goes all the way from design to development to deployment and operation. You can have a small team. Brooks talked about a surgical team where you've got 1 primary surgeon and then you've got a tool maker and you've got other assistants, but you've got 1 primary person who's the architect. Excuse me. That's a huge advantage of automation. Again, the book is called The Mythical Man Month. And like I said, it was built around operating systems, but any large IT project, there's a lot of helpful information in that. They had a pretty limited scope in what they were doing. They had pretty clear direction in what they were doing. Again, they had analytics reporting on SAP in the United States, analytics reporting on SAP in the Netherlands, and they wanted to consolidate the 2. So they did pretty well. Small companies tend to take on these projects and be fairly successful. Because the people who are doing in IT probably know by name the analysts, they know the owners of the source systems. So if they have questions, they can walk down the hall or use Microsoft Teams or whatever it is. They know who to contact. They know who to talk to figure out, what does this value mean? Why does this data look like this? Talk to the analysts about, okay, what are you trying to report on? What do the executives want? The smaller the companies, they do okay. And again, the team tends to be smaller. A lot of times the developers are wearing multiple hats. So there weren't a lot of risks in this. Again, the one risk was failure of the entire project. I guess that is a risk. But they mitigated that with using WhereScape. I'll talk a little bit more about general mitigation too. I've got 7 minutes left? Wow. I'll have to speak faster. Medium-sized companies. Of the small, medium, and large companies, these are the ones that have the most failures. I'd say of a company of 200 to 2,000 people, they've gotten large enough that those familiar lines of communication are gone, but they don't have the structures and things in place that large companies do. So this company, the Body Shop, I believe they do online sales of cosmetics things. Their risk is that they're big enough to be in different groups and silos, but they're small enough that, like I said, they don't have the overreaching PMO, the program management office, or identifiable QA groups or things like that that large companies do. So if I were consulting a company that was mid-sized, I would definitely warn them about things they can do to mitigate the problem. And this is true of small, medium, and large companies. Small bites. Figure out an area of expertise. Maybe it's accounting, and just work on that. Maybe it's sales, and just work on that. Too many small companies get too many requests from too many people, and the scope of the project blows up. And that's a huge problem, because all of a sudden they've got requests coming in from 6 or 7 different groups to produce all these things, and these projects eventually collapse, unfortunately. But again, having automation tools, the idea is that I can produce a better product faster. And let's say I've generated 200 objects, and because I'm in a small company, I didn't quite get all the requirements right. A new requirement comes in. The nice thing about automation is that I don't have to modify those 200 programs myself. I can modify the templates, I can modify the rules that generate them, and then regenerate them all. I worked at a company in the 90s developing programming with Informix, if you're familiar with databases back in the 90s. And we were building a system for handling warehouses, inventory, forklifts, pallets, those kinds of things. It was probably 2.5 to 3 million lines of code. And our automation was the programmers of about 20 of us We would take templates and then we would do global search and replaces, change table names, do things like that, compile it, hopefully it compiles, run a quick test, and then hand it off to QA. So Informix released a new version of their database, and something we were doing which was legal and worked was now generating an error. So because we'd hand-coded all this stuff, I had to go through and manually modify about 300 different files and make the same change in every single file. So that's one of the disadvantages of handwritten code. In addition to that, if I wrote something and someone else wrote something and someone else wrote something, I had a hard enough time maintaining my own code, fixing bugs in my own code, let alone someone else who's been gone for 6 months having to figure out what they did and how they wrote it. The advantage, if we'd had an automation tool that could generate the code, I probably could have modified the template, regenerated those 300 files, and in a day or two be done. But again, the difference between the small company and the medium company is you've lost the familiarity between the departments, but you haven't yet gained the organizational structure to overcome some of the obstacles you're going to run into. And that brings us to large enterprises. Vodafone, I've done a lot of consulting with large companies, and everyone curses that it takes 6 weeks to get a firewall open, and there's compliance groups, and there's configuration change boards, and everyone talks about how slow things go. But the advantage is you've got things like a program management office, you've got things like dedicated QA teams, you've got outside consultants who come in. So I may not work with the data analysts directly, but there is more of a structure in place and more controls in place for a large company. My alarm is about to go off. So I want to talk in general terms about lessons learned. How do you overcome these problems? Maybe you're migrating to the cloud. Maybe you've got enough technical debt that you're just entirely replacing your old analytics system. How do you build things that work, that are useful, and provide the analysts, the scientists with the data they need? So I mentioned scope. Pick a single category. The old adage of don't try and drink the whole ocean. That's probably the number one thing I'd say. Another thing is rapid prototyping. Being able to get results in front of analysts and users early on, so they can give you feedback early on. A key thing that people really ignore is that they look at this whole development process as an IT process. It's got technical people with technical tools, developing a technical product, migrating data and things like that. So the mindset is this is an IT project. Really, the key to success in not just building a system, but building a usable system that's got good quality and things like that is make it a business process. Get the analysts involved early. Let's get the business involved early, get the people who own the source systems involved early, and really treat the data warehouse creation, data foundation creation as a business process, because that's ultimately what you're doing. I always refer to these things as products. If I build a data warehouse, a data lake house, if I'm doing data mesh, whatever it is, those are products that IT is creating, not just so they can create them and wonder in their glory, but created so that analysts can produce business results. So what does it mean to make it a business-oriented process? Don't break down the firewall between IT and the analysts. I've been on project after project after project where IT gets their requirements, they go back in their cubby holes, they do their work, and then throw it over the wall. And it's not what the end users were expecting. So break down that wall, have reviews pretty regularly with the end users, make sure you get their input on what's working, what's not working. And as I said, do a lot of prototypes. Another thing that if I go back to the Mythical Man Month book, there was a phrase in there called plan on throwing one away. If you're building a new system, develop a prototype and then throw it away. The idea that, well, I've already invested 3 months into this, I'll just keep adding things to it until I get it production ready, doesn't work because you learn so many lessons along the way. So business process, prototyping, plan on throwing the first one away. Those are probably the key things I would say. Planning and phased approach is a way of saying, do things a piece at a time. And then leveraging cloud infrastructure for AI success. I did not write that bullet, so honestly, I'm not quite sure what that means. So I will say that if you migrate to the cloud, I was at Snowflake Summit 2 years ago, and there were probably 300 vendors, exhibitors showing things. I would say 60% of them, if not more, their slogan was, "We'll reduce your Snowflake costs." So how many people here are working with Snowflake today? Just a quick show of hands. And how many of you got more expensive bills than you were expecting to get? Not too many. Okay, a couple. But that's the number one thing I hear about the cloud, because everything's consumption-based. How do you get a handle on that? Well, again, developing things right the first time, less testing, less required testing, I should say. Things like that reduce the cost. Snowflake actually loves us because with WhereScape you get things done faster and you start consuming WhereScape resources, Snowflake resources, faster. The sales guys at Snowflake get paid by consumption. So if we can tell them that, hey, customer A is going to start consuming lots of resources in their production system in a month rather than in 6 months, sales guys love it. Now, conversely, the customers actually like it too, because their testing time goes way, way down. Their rework time goes way, way down. Maintenance time goes way, way down. So yeah, they're consuming resources sooner, but they're also producing business-ready data sooner as well. An example I've given to a couple of people at the desk is we had a company that was developing a new data warehouse. I've got 8 minutes left. And the QA department said that any objects that were created with WhereScape no longer had to go through integration testing. Didn't have to go through unit testing. They could go straight into integration testing. So this is an example of the power of automation and generating the design and the development of the data warehouse. So let's say they had 400 objects. Let's say it takes 4 hours to write and run and debug and fix a unit test. They said the QA team said, we don't need to do that anymore. That's 1,600 hours of work they just saved, plus all the consumption costs and everything else associated with it. The quality of what you get in terms of does it work or not is much, much, much better. Is it doing it right? That's the first question. Yeah, it compiles. Yeah, it passes the requirements test. The next question, is it doing the right thing? Yeah, well, technically it works, but it's not quite doing. We're getting the results we expect, but the results aren't what we want. Both those kinds of quality control, quality assurance checks get much, much easier the faster you can turn things around. As I said, maintenance and testing was a real problem. Documentation is also another important thing to make a system usable. If I just give someone access to a database and say, go at it, here's the facts, here's the dimensions, figure it all out, that's one thing. A big selling point for WhereScape, surprisingly, is documentation. It actually opens up a lot of eyes when we show them the documentation we're capable of creating. Something as simple as data lineage. You've got an entity that's out there in a dimension somewhere. People always ask when the analyst is presenting something, where'd that data come from? Do you trust that number? Homegrown systems, you can spend a couple days backtracking trying to figure out where things came from and how they got there. With WhereScape and automated systems, because we have the metadata, I can instantly tell you that value came from through these transformations, through these calculations, and the original data is in these 3 source systems. The documentation, full business glossaries, full description of what the facts, what the dimensions are, how they work, how they join, examples, usage, what the grain is, comments on the columns talking about units and measure, all those kinds of things are part of a successful project. Normally, the documentation, especially in programming, is the phase of a project where someone runs around, grabs all the Post-it notes, and types it into Word. And then when they hit File Save, as soon as they hit File Save, it's obsolete. So the idea of using data warehouse automation, migrating things to the cloud, we're capturing metadata. We can generate documentation every morning. So people in the dev environment, the QA environment, production environment can all have their own sets of documentation. I talked about project success, again, scope, prototyping, involving the business early on. What tools can I use to overcome technical challenges? Well, I know one I can think of. That's WhereScape. How do I plan for unforeseeable future? I don't know if it's unforeseeable. How do I plan for it? just remaining flexible, being able to adapt, being able to make quick changes, being able to respond quickly in a way that I can push out global changes because, again, everything's being generated. It's not hand-coded. It's not doing things like that. And I think that may wrap me up. Yeah. So that says a MetaQuest 2. It's actually a MetaQuest 3 we have on our booth. So if you drop by, I don't know if you can scan that QR code right now. Maybe if you zoom in, maybe you can. If not, you can drop by our table. Well, if we scan your badge, I believe you're entered. Or are they entered? If I'm seeing a yes. Okay. So if we scan your badge, you're entered. If you just scan the QR code on our table, you're entered as well. We'll be here throughout the rest of the day. Like I said, I wish I had time for a demo. As I said, I can generate facts and dimensions that fast. Prototype it, show it to someone. If they don't like it, I can change it. Get it done very quickly. And I'll stick around for any questions, or if anyone has any questions about issues they've run into in terms of migrating to cloud or creating their data foundation, we'll be glad to answer those now, or if you think of it later, drop by the table. So I think I even saved you 4 minutes. 4 minutes? No, I ran over. Oh, my alarm didn't go off. Sorry, I made you late for lunch, but thank you all very much.